Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Nacho Tuesday. And today I have Brian Lee here with Gildre. And without further ado, we'd love if you can introduce what your professional community does and learn more about your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, Andy. Happy to be here. And yeah, in terms of how we got connected with NachoNacho at Gildre, we really work to create a space for meaningful connections for what we call the middle 98% of entrepreneurs. And we say middle 98% because when we look at a lot of the communities out there, maybe those that, phenomenal groups that cater to kind of the top 1% of entrepreneurs, or those that maybe on that bottom 1%, we really wanted to create a space with vetted subject matter experts, startup leaders, investors, people who have done it before. And we know that all it takes is sometimes one piece of information or one conversation to completely change the trajectory of how someone views themselves or their business. And that's really what we're looking to build. And that's what we've been building really since last May. And, here we are with about 180 members and looking forward to continuing to grow.
Awesome. And why is it so important for people to be a part of a professional network? What tips would you recommend for people to be able to find a network that might fit for them, and what kind of value can they receive from it?
Yeah, and that's a great question because I think there's just so many networks out there, right? There's so many communities, so many groups. And I think a lot of times these days we're always looking to hear about, all right, what's that third space? And really, where's that place that you can go to connect with others, right? Typically it was always like work and then home. And then you had either maybe it was the bar or it was, playing squash or tennis or basketball or some social activity with friends after. And I think a lot of times we're really losing that. And we're seeing that as things get more and more expensive, it's a lot more difficult to actually find a meaningful third place to connect. And really the importance of these types of communities are, one, obviously to elevate yourself and meet interesting people to elevate your thought process and how you look at problems and how you look at things going on. But two, it's just to find people that, and hopefully, right, why we built Gildre, it was to kind of weed out a lot of these communities or groups where you just pop your head in under the hood and it's just people selling, right, or people self-promoting, and even on LinkedIn a lot of days, right? And LinkedIn's such a powerful sales tool now, but when it first started, right, you were really connecting with people you met in person at an event, you worked with, or you really had that at least one level of connection with. And I'm sure, Andy, you've probably seen it. I'm sure people out there listening can also see it, right? Probably get a dozen virtual assistants, or let me help you build some lead gen funnel, or development shops, things like that. And so a lot of it's kind of gone away from those actual meaningful connections. And so I think that's why it's so important to find some type of community now that you can relate with, to actually build these connections with people that you want to meet and talk to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. My inbox is full of people with some sort of sales pitch, and you can tell what happens next if you add them. It's going to be like a series of 7 emails coming to you that they think is, how to sell people these days. But
Exactly.
yeah, meaningful connections is where it's really at still, and always will be, actually, even with the advent of AI these days. But and you can't go to the bar every night too. That your liver is not going to like that one. So
Right. Yeah. It's always a balancing act, right?
yep, exactly. So tell us more about your community and how it operates. Do you guys do any in-person events, or what does it look like there?
Yeah, and so we are an international community in the sense that we're primarily North American based. About 70 to 80% of our members are here in North America. Other 30% or so, right, all over the globe: Europe, Africa, Asia, LATAM, Australia. Amazing founders and mentors and just innovators in these different spaces. And so part of it is, yeah, we want to support the in-person connections and a lot of our regional hubs, being the Chicagos and Austins and New York, San Fran, a lot of these big hubs here in the States, but also how do we connect members, yeah, from Switzerland and from the Bay Area to Sydney and Nigeria and Lagos and all over the globe. So a lot of them are virtual events through our speed networking, which we host once a month, our innovation roundtables, our executive workshops. Really just how can we create as many value-added opportunities and events to give people the chance to, like we said, to meaningfully connect. And I think networking has sometimes this negative stipulation about it of like, okay, like it's so transactional, right? Networking is just like, well, how can I help someone, or how can they help me, right? And this kind of give and take. And realistically, we're just, again, trying to get back to the basics of, hey, like it's in many ways, it's kind of hard to make new friends and connections, right? The older you get, the less time that you're going out socially, whether it was through university or through work. And so how can you kind of get back to developing these connections with people without having to worry like, oh, are they just talking to me because they want me to invest in their company or because they want me to help them complete a user interview, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, that's the importance of win-win relationships in general. So, and the concept of karma, if you will, right? So a lot of times transactional people are thinking in terms of, what can I get out of this person? I might give you something if I can get something, but that's totally the wrong approach. Even if you could help people without even trying to receive anything in return, you're creating, I think, good relationships between people, good word of mouth, and you're building a reputation, which at the end of the day, reputation is is a cornerstone of who you are as an individual and a business professional. So the importance of thinking in terms of win-win every single time you meet somebody is not only better for them, but it's also better for you in the long term as well, which seems counterintuitive to the people who are trying to get something today.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think that's where, when you look at the types of people that go to networking events, right, let's be fair, right? There's no right or wrong way to kind of do networking, but there's certainly more wrong ways to do it, I guess, if that makes sense, right? Like, you can do to each their own, right? I'm not going to critique people on how they choose to network, but I think if you go into it, like, it's very clear when you talk to someone at these types of things, and they're very, like, to your point, right, very clearly in it either for themselves or something specific. And there's nothing wrong in going into an event with an agenda, right, and something that you want to accomplish. But again, it's just like everything in life. And I think Brad Felt, a Techstars, gives a really good example in his book about, give first, right? That give first mentality. And realistically, just we as humans, right? Hopefully most of us are inclined to somewhat be altruistic, and, hey, I have knowledge, I have something that I can share and give. I want to be able to share and give that, right? And not necessarily expect something in return, but know that in the whole karmic slate of the universe, or whatever you believe in, right, that, you do enough good, you're building your own personal brand. And some people will, to your point, understand, oh, perfect, person X is something that they've helped me, they've helped, make referrals or connections, things like that. Like, they are someone that I can, support down the line or immediately. So I think it's very clear when you go into these events who's, in it to actually support the ecosystem and community, and who's in it for themselves.
Definitely. Yeah. And sometimes it's people that are just a little nervous. So, you might be coming in there with that kind of a nervous attitude.
Sure.
People sometimes get the wrong directive, I think, from their leaders. Maybe they're, really strictly trying to get to like a certain KPI. So I think it's important for, people that might be a little unsure of themselves, just go to meet people, right? It all starts with just having a genuine interest in meeting people. And then if you're one of the leaders sending out your salespeople or whoever, just make it clear to them that their first job is to build relationships with people. The KPIs and everything else will follow after that. So, you need to ensure that your team's out there, not just looking at transactional relationships, but they understand that they're out there to, represent your brand and actually just build relationships with people and create a positive image that will ultimately create a better overall image and sales for your brand down the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Because I can't imagine how many, and make it, people can prove me wrong, right? But I feel like I've been to a lot of these events where you do see someone, oh, I do, right, XYZ. We work with startups like this. Do you know anyone, or are you interested, right? And there's like that very, like, within the first 30 seconds you hear that. And I would be really interested in hearing how many of those scenarios actually turn into a sale, right? Versus someone like, oh, okay, cool, nice to meet you, right? Let's, move on from the conversation, right? And so I think, again, whereas if you actually take time to, what you said, develop the relationship. Hey, I came to this event, right, because I come to these events all the time, right? I'm part of this ecosystem. I know the people in this room. I'm not here as kind of, yeah, I get it, my boss told me so I'm going to go try and get 10 leads, right, from this event, or whatever that was my goal. There's right and wrong ways to go about obtaining that goal. And again, no discredit to the boss or whoever sent the person to do that. But I think that's, again, there's certainly events that are suited for that type of networking, and those where you actually see communities and groups trying to actually foster connections, more than the transactional side.
Yeah, like maybe trade shows tend to be a little bit more transactional. Not so much maybe the networking and happy hour events afterwards, which, the approach that we're talking about works a lot better. But if you're going to trade show booth one after the other, it tends to be a little bit more transactional. And to your point, that's totally fine in that particular business setting. People kind of expect it, right?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
So I guess another big concept too is mentorship. Why do you think it's so important to be to find a good mentor and to even be a mentor for other people? And what trade-off do you think exists between the trial by fire, kind of learning on your own, so you're that old wise guy one day telling other people how to do things, or just learning from somebody that's already been through it?
Yeah, and I mean, I can't say enough big things about why it's important to have some type of coach or mentor or advisor, right? Just in your life, personally or professionally. And I think and anyone can kind of relate to that, I'm sure, right? Growing up, whether you played sports, whether you were getting tutored or anything, right? Your parents or some type of figure in your life. It's again, it only takes one conversation to kind of completely mold and change the trajectory of how we think about things, right? Whether it's specific to business or a personal problem. And I think mentors, again, just play that role, and the right mentors, mind you, right? Because the right mentor that genuinely is about that give first mentality, that wants to kind of give back because they're passionate about what you as a individual are doing or building or at the forefront of whatever. I think when you have the right mentor, yeah, it makes all the difference. And whether that's a conversation once a quarter, that just a regular check-in, whether you're talking every week, every month, um, it just goes a long way. Because I think one, it helps you keep yourself accountable. If, especially as a solo founder, or maybe with you and just kind of your co-founding team, having that type of mentor, whether they have more experience or whether they've got more time or whether they just know an industry better, that just kind of opens up a whole different set of possibilities for how you want to look at the business. And it's not just from a knowledge standpoint, right? Of course, when we think of mentorship, or at least when we think of mentorship at Gildre, the whole idea is it is very strategic. It shouldn't be things like, oh, let me look at like your pitch deck, or let me introduce you to investors, right? Because that starts to get very transactional, right? Where you need to develop trust just like anything else. As the mentor, how are you going? You're not going to just open up your book of business to someone you just met, like without actually taking the time to get to know them, knowing if they're going to represent you well in terms of your connections. So I think, yeah, having that coach, mentor, advisor, whomever is just like a completely almost must have for most people's careers, right? At some point in their careers, there might be times where, to your point, you just have to kind of learn and do it and figure it out for yourself and fail fast and hopefully bounce back from that.
Yeah.
But again, the right mentor can save you a lot of time and certainly a lot of money whenever, whatever project you're looking at building or growing on your own.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, a lot of these mentors, they're very helpful on the strategic advice level, especially too, right? So, kind of helping you do the legwork, right, as an entrepreneur, as you should, right? But they can give you a lot of better strategic direction and maybe how to approach different problems and how to solve them, and then it's up to you to kind of do the work yourself, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree. It shouldn't be some transactional relationship where they're doing all the work for you. Doing the work also helps you learn so that one day you could be a valuable mentor as well. And one more caveat I'd say for that too is my first 2 years living in the Bay Area, I moved down there and I ran across a lot of these advisor wannabe people. So keep a lookout for those people as well too. So there's a lot of great advisors out there that do want to help, but there's also a lot of people that just want to get a piece of a bunch of different companies. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really be careful about which advisors or mentors you bring into your company, because the ones that are really genuinely interested in helping you, those are the ones who could really help you grow and excel. The other ones, with very vague promises that
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily seem like they really want to invest in you as a person. A lot of them sometimes could be there just to kind of ride your coattails and hope your startup's successful.
100%, right? It's just like everything, right? One of the most important assets you have as a founder is going to be your equity, whether you're a solo founder, co-founders, and it can seem, oh, it's only like a fraction of a quarter of a percent, right, that I'd give to someone. But again, when you said that adds up, and to that point, that's why I will always challenge founders too, as you're looking to bring on advisors, see if they'll invest in your company directly, right? Before, instead of the other way around, right? If they invest in you and they believe in you and your idea, obviously, yeah, you can in turn, right, compensate them through whatever retainers or through equity. But typically those that actually believe in the long-term vision of what you're building and your company itself, that creates a much better relationship than someone that, you should never feel like you have to beg your advisor or mentor for advice, right? Like that should come ideally freely and fluently
Yeah.
because they believe in you, right? If they don't, and they, like you said, they just want to ride your coattails, then that relationship's most likely going to be doomed from the beginning.
Definitely. And to your point too, definitely mentors out there, do your due diligence on the people you're working with as well too, because they're also representing you as well. I guess
Absolutely.
any other tips you would recommend for professionals to build their professional network and do it the right way to build meaningful relationships?
Yeah, and I think there's such an abundance of, if you go on like Luma or Posh or Eventbrite, right? There's just so many events that you can do virtually in your own city. If you're not in a big tech or entrepreneurial hub, right? There's still plenty of things you can do online that facilitate this level of networking connections. And I think there's to me, at least, how my approach when I was first, anytime I moved to a new city or tried to develop my own circle, if you will, is I would just initially try to go to just different types of events, right? That all still resonated with what I was looking to do, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's just specific industries, whether it's just general ecosystem events for investors or founders or whatnot. Just go out there and find your community, right? Or find your people. And at a certain point, right, you'll just start going to less and less of these broad events and start sticking with maybe 2 or 3, right? And seeing the same people over and over. And if you're like me, right, where it does take me kind of a much more conscious effort to like remember names and put in faces to names, right? When you go to these different things, right, it can be tough. I get it. Even if you connect on LinkedIn or Instagram or anything like that, it's tough to remember people's faces and actually build that connection. But when you stop going to like dozens of different events and maybe start going to the same one, hey, there's this founder breakfast I go to every other Friday, right? And I know it's most likely going to be the same people with a few new faces. You start to develop these actual more intimate relationships and conversations than just a chat over a beer or a chat over a cocktail, right? And so I'd say, start broad and then start thinning it out until you find, your circle. And you might find that it's not your circle after 5 or 6 months, or you might find that, hey, maybe after that time you've made some good connections and you can still keep them going, but you need something else, in which case, right, you can kind of rinse and repeat. But I think the biggest thing is just, find your circle, be genuine about it, and know that, you're, as long as you're not going to each event with the expectation of trying to extract value or something, then you can just make these genuine connections without having to worry about, like, what are they thinking of me, or what do they think about my company, right? Things like that.
Yeah, and if your entire focus is to build meaningful relationships, it doesn't even matter what people think anyway. You're just you're building connections. So a rising tide lifts all boats, kind of a thing.
Yeah, 100%.
So I guess online image is very important these days. Obviously, we're talking online. We haven't met in person yet. We will someday. But
there you go. Yeah.
What tips do you recommend for people to, carry themselves with a great online image, including not only representing themselves with the way they set up their professional profile, say on LinkedIn, but also about positioning and maybe establishing credibility that other people can notice online if they haven't had the pleasure of meeting you in person?
Right. And I think that there's so many different ways you could do it, first off. And LinkedIn obviously is kind of like the gold standard just from the professional standpoint. But I also know a lot of people who just don't use LinkedIn or don't like it for whatever reason, right? For some of the reasons we spoke about earlier in terms of like the spam and stuff you get, but just a host of different things. But I think, again, it just goes to like, how do you want people to view you as a professional, right? Viewing that versus like how you care about people thinking about you personally is going to be different. But I think is when you look to say, all right, when someone meets Andy, right, at a conference, and say, okay, great, Andy's with NachoNacho, he leads partnerships there, he does XYZ, right? That's kind of the tagline that you see on LinkedIn. But what's deeper than that? And I'm sure, again, I guess because I'm not going to see people don't, because I don't, but like, I'm sure if people go through people's profiles and see, okay, here's their education, here's their experience. But really the biggest thing is, to me, and I think that stands out the most, is what are you doing on the side from your main job? And I know in America, I think so much of our identity is about what you do, right? And that's kind of the first conversations we see, whether you're meeting, people at a party or people at an event or just whatever. Oh, great, XYZ, nice to meet you. What do you do? And it's interesting that so much of our identity, is tied to that, because I get it, right? That's typically what we do most in a day outside of sleep or outside of maybe a very busy hobby. And so I think about your personal brand and how you shape that online specifically, right? Where you don't get the chance to meet so many people in person versus just having X a number of connections or followers on X platform. I think it's, again, just what do you want to be known as, right? Maybe it's a thought leader, maybe it's a speaker, maybe it's someone that a super connector, right? Whatever. And I would say the groups that you're a part of, the events that you join, the events that you speak at should also reflect that. And so in my case, right, I just recently joined Founder Institute as a mentor, have been involved, in a few other accelerators and just opportunities to kind of speak or be a guest panelist and judge. And a lot of that I do because I'd like to think, right, it's because I just love entrepreneurship and I love founders and that style of building. And so for me, it's exciting. And so I try to kind of create my profile around ways that I either could volunteer or I make it open for people to say, hey, like you can approach me, right? I might not get to every single message right away, but if someone says, hey, we're looking for a panelist for this topic or speaker on here, I try to build my profile around ways to say, yeah, I'm certainly open to that. And I think if you are looking for those opportunities or maybe advisory opportunities, board of directors, just any types of engagements, the things you list, not just from your experience, but from volunteering, right? From mentoring opportunities, things like that. That goes a long way in terms of how people identify you in that online space.
Yeah, that's a great point that you brought up. I'm thinking of the term association and authority. So being associated with the right people, being associated with the right groups or organizations or panels even creates authority for what you do as a thought leader in the space, so to speak. So joining these professional communities, you could help build your identity as an entrepreneur, a founder. Speaking on panels, doing these types of webinars also kind of positions yourself as like a thought leader in the space, and that level of association really helps build your online brand identity as well too.
Yeah, and this again, there's just so many amazing communities that support that. There's a lot of the wrong ones too, of course, right? But a lot that the people that do it right, it's very clear because as soon as you join, you'll see who you surround yourself with, right? And if you go, nothing against these, but like if you go into like a Discord community or a Reddit group and there's like tens of thousands of people and it's all just like, here's my demo or sign up for this or like here's a discount, right? It's just a lot of this like outwards transactional, right? Do you want to surround yourself with people like that or those that are willing to, give instead of take? And so again, it's just about finding the right community, the right group. There's a dozen, dozens and dozens of great ones out there. So again, it's just finding if you're, a woman leader and you're looking for other female executives, right? You can look at Chief, right? If you're looking at mentorship or early stage building, right? You can look at Gildre. If you look at just so many different types of amazing groups out there, again, which one is going to be the right for you? How do you associate with their mission? And it's not always going to align one-to-one, but even if you share some of the same sentiments, you can either grow into it, or a lot of times these organizations also change, right? So when you join something, it might not always be forever, of course. And so sometimes you're just going to have to move on and grow just as we do in our own personal lives.
Definitely. Yeah. So I guess speaking on that, I guess what's the most common thing that people get wrong about building their online professional image that they could switch overnight and just immediately fix? It would just help them get so much further ahead right away.
That's a good one. I think so much, it's just taking one step back. I think so many people face this issue of not like I guess you could call it imposter syndrome, right? It's like, am I good enough to do X, Y, Z, whether that's your job or whether that's speaking on a topic, right? Whether that's anything. And don't get me wrong, right? Events like there's hundreds of millions of podcasts nowadays, right? Again, you can see which ones are better than others and which ones are, from the speakers, from the hosts, from the quality of the content. And I think nowadays, right, you see so many issues with this imposter syndrome and people, I think very clearly, just like you would with a person at an in-person event, very clearly you can see that from an online event or someone's online profile, right? Like what have they actually done versus what are they saying? Yeah. And, and unfortunately, LinkedIn's kind of one of the biggest perpetrators of this, right? In terms of like, anyone can be a CEO, right? Anyone can do this, right? And it's like, and it's fair, right? There's no vetting, right? You could be the CEO of X company you made up and create a company page and it's there. And I think, again, any seasoned
CEO and employee.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like I think any seasoned individual should hopefully be able to kind of see through the BS at a certain point. But I think that's kind of what I would, to your question, right? Like how can you kind of like reframe your profile? I think, again, just like it's almost back to basics, right? Like eliminate a lot of the fluff that you would have in your profile. That being said, if it's still relevant to what you're trying to do or what you're doing, by all means, you can keep that in. But I think, again, it's like, if it truly doesn't belong there, and I think yourself, if in your heart you believe it should not be there. And the way I look at it, if someone asked me to speak on that topic in front of a room of people for an hour, right? Would I feel comfortable doing that?
Yeah.
And if my answer to that question is no, I would remove it, right? And so again, if you and truthfully, right, not to say that you could BS your way through an hour, like if you put yourself in a room with another 100 experts about that topic, could you speak to it? You don't have to be 100%. You know, you don't have to be like in that top 1% of like thought leaders there. But if you can speak to it intelligently, then yes, sure, keep it on. Otherwise, everything else, remove that, because it's just going to paint you. It's much better to be, in my mind at least, I know some might disagree, but it's the whole, you know, master of none or master of one, right, type of thing. Yeah, like be a thought leader, be an expert in a few things that you know you can absolutely lead and provide guidance on, versus trying to be an expert on, you know, endless things that, you know, is not going to get you anywhere.
Totally. I agree with that. I think a lot of times if you have a very specific focus or identity, and for the right opportunities or the right connections that really matter, resonates with those people, right? You know, even for like looking for a job, if people are doing that, right? You don't want to just say you're some like XYZ marketer. They're looking for a specific role for a specific need that they have. So a lot of people don't even tailor their resumes, for instance. You know, you just get this most generic resume ever that they probably sent to like 100, 200 companies, and that's just not going to fly. But if the words on that resume stand out, you know, for the position that they're trying to get hired for, and it really looks like there's a connection there, that's the person that's going to get the looks. But not just for getting hired, but, you know, being a business, being an entrepreneur online, just attracting potential customers for you as well. If you have a very focused identity and your potential customers really see that and connect with what, you know, what you're promoting there, you're gonna have a much better hit rate and conversions from that.
100%, because it just comes down to how are people viewing your profile. If your LinkedIn profile or image or whatever online, right, is about credibility and you use that as a way to kind of sell people or generate leads, that's one thing, right? Versus building credibility as an advisor, as a mentor, as someone that can do these speaking engagements or help groups and things like that. So again, I think it always comes down to what's the purpose of your LinkedIn or your online presence? How are you using that that profile and that image? And then you can kind of tailor your experiences around that, right? Obviously, you're not going to make things up, but you're going to be able to say, hey, I don't need these like, you know, the last 20 years I spent at my career at these different companies, right? I don't need these big chunks or all these things, right? Let's thin it down. Let's add things and distill it to maybe the most recent, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, because that's truly what you're going to be an expert in than maybe something you did at the start of your career 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, nobody cares if you threw parties in college.
Yeah, exactly. Or your, you know, internship experience, things like that. Like great for recent grads, right? But I think that's very quickly dissipates the further established you get.
Exactly. Totally agree. So I guess failure comes with any profession. You know, I always love to bring this up because honestly, the best stories come out of it. And honestly, some of my greatest stories and best learnings and honestly, even best friendships came out of some of those moments in your career where you fail. And, you know, especially when you realize when the chips are down, you know, who's really there for you and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, do you have any great failure lesson and what did you learn from it?
Yes, very, very many failure lessons.
Me too.
And I think one of the big ones, I guess, more semi recently was when, so my friend and I launched a B2C travel tech app. We started development for it in 2019, and right, and it's very quickly gotten less expensive to build apps, and whether it's platforms, mobile applications, anything like that. And so, right, he was our solo coder, right, hammering out these like tens of hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And finally, when we got the chance to launch, it was, you know, here came May of 2020. And at the time with the pandemic, no one was, certainly not many people were traveling or going out and about. And so, yeah, so that was kind of like, that was our 14-month plan. And when it got done, we just, you know, we have to write it, right? And so very quickly we realized, okay, like, no one's using this as intended, that's fine. We had users, so that was at least a positive. So very quickly, I would say within like 6 months, we did like a full pivot from the B2C consumer side all the way to SMBs, like Chamber of Commerce's destination marketing, really kind of tailoring it to how do we help communities highlight the local businesses, right? And these things that were so impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so in terms of failing from our initial concept that we mapped out for 24 plus months, it looked very different, right? But I think as a result of just being flexible and knowing, okay, like that's somewhat of like that fail fast and just kind of like find something else that works. It's again, it was just talking to our first customers, talking to the early adopters and saying, how can we help you now when everything else is going on, right? Because we certainly didn't expect this either. So what does this do for our business as partners? So I've very much taken that same principle with other startup ventures I've done, other companies I advise and work with, and just knowing what's that kind of like endpoint, right? Like I think motivation and like sheer grit and will is super important for all entrepreneurs. And so what's that point where where it feels like, okay, you need to just stop banging your head against the wall and maybe just go around, right? Or find a different solution. And so, that's kind of
your
my
best
failure story.
come out of those pivots, right? So that's where, you can identify the failure and turn it into a positive. And that's a lot of times where the best companies come out of is that they realize at an early stage something isn't working, and sometimes it's to no fault their own. But it's that next pivot, the next decision they make that makes them stumble across something that's very successful and goes forward from there.
Yeah, exactly. Could be so many different reasons, right? Too early, users aren't ready, blue ocean, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's just how do you adapt and how do you kind of face that failure and own that failure? And it might not necessarily be failure, but how do you own that change and then, make the best out of it?
Yeah, totally. So I guess what's next for Gildre, and why should people choose your platform over another network that's potentially out there? I already know my reasons, but just audience out there listening today.
Of course. And then like I kind of what I was saying before, right? There's just so many phenomenal communities and entrepreneurial groups out there, right? There's definitely no shortage of them. And I think the reason why we wanted to create Gildre was just because communities are really the sum of the individuals that come from, that make them up, right? That are part of each group. And so, you could have every community ideally is going to have different core values and different mission statements and things like that, right? So you can find which one you resonate with the most. But to me, it's always going to be the people that are in that community. And that's why when you get to these communities where they have like hundreds of thousands of people, right? Sure, you can feel like a part of the group, but you really won't even talk to probably more than like a small percentage of them on any given basis, right? So for us, for Gildre, the whole concept was how do we create a community of people that want to be there, right? That want to put in the work. And they might not be the people that, some of our founders are phenomenal and that they have, multi-millions in annual recurring revenue and whatnot and multiple exits, but it's not a requirement for us. And so whether or not that is your background or whether or not you're a first-time founder, right? Or you've been an executive at Coca-Cola or Hershey or a company for 30 years, and now you've decided this is the time to start your first company. To me, lifelong learning and being able to learn from anyone, anywhere, at any age, right, is a huge piece of just growth. And like what we were talking about before with AI, right? Like I fully trust that I am not an expert on machine learning or artificial intelligence. I'll happily learn from a 20-year-old, right? That's been doing this the past 5 years and grew up in school and anyone. So I think to me that's what Gildre's about, is just, again, how can you put ego aside, learn from individuals who, might have raised $250 million rounds, for their companies, or individuals who might have just been studying this the past 10 years at university. Everyone's here to kind of help lift each other. As you said, like a rising tide lifts all ships. And so we find that when people aren't going into it with these, me first mentalities and versus like, how can I help those around me? That just creates a much better space for people to actually get value out of it.
I like that. That's sounds like you guys really understand the true essence of community. A lot of times, a lot of times you see like those very exclusive groups, right? And so to your point, even some of those earlier stage entrepreneurs might not be able to get access to it. Some of them can cost tens of thousands a month or a year even. So it kind of puts it out of their reach, right? But even those people tend to be an older audience, more established, and they kind of get into like an echo chamber, if you will, of like, like what was successful 10 years ago, where some of the newer entrepreneurs are bringing in maybe newer ideas. They might not be as established, but they definitely bring something to the table as well too. Whereas the older mentors that might have been through a couple of cycles there also have knowledge to impart on the younger entrepreneurs as well too. So it all kind of balances out, I guess, if you will.
Absolutely. Yep. It's for us, we're exclusive, but not elitist. I don't want to pretend that we're like, to me, everyone has the equal chance to build amazing things, and everyone should have access to resources and tools to help that, right? Obviously, when you get to a certain stage, everyone's time is valued a little bit differently. But I think, again, even if you're whether you're a billionaire with multiple exits and multiple hundreds of millions of dollars raised, right? Or whether you're just someone that sold your first company at the age of 19 and you're 21 years old now. Like anyone has the capability to provide impact and provide value. So again, just as you look for communities out there, or your circle and your tribe, your group, who is going to be there for you, like you said, when the chips are down or when you're at your lowest, to help elevate your performance and elevate you as a person.
Totally true. And I love that line you said, exclusive but not elitist. So I think that would be like a slogan for you guys or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just, like, there's great groups out there. Nothing against anyone that is more exclusive or not. But again, for me, just so many founders so many people say they want to do things. We're the space for the people that actually mean it, right? That are going to, put their money where their mouth is and actually commit to the process. Because I'm sure, as you know too, right, working at startups and working in tech, it's like, it is a lifestyle, right? In many cases, right? People do this because they love it and they want to be surrounded by people that share that same passion. So I think whether or not you join a community, whether or not you just go to, maybe it's a running group, right? Maybe it's a book club, whatever you do for your personal enjoyment, just find some people that share that same energy and that same passion. And then you'll see very clearly, right? It's much easier to develop those into meaningful relationships than just like one-offs. Oh, I'll meet you at the next event 5 months from now, that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Well, it sounds like you guys are really onto something, and we really appreciate the partnership with you guys. Anybody interested in being a part of a meaningful community for entrepreneurs, tech leaders, people that want to really develop themselves, doesn't matter if you've been around the block a few times or if you're just getting started. This sounds like a great community for passionate entrepreneurs and tech leaders out there. So we definitely recommend that you check out Gildre. You can pick it up today in the B2B SaaS marketplace. NachoNacho has it today for 20% off memberships. So make sure you join that community right away, because every ounce of energy that you put into building relationships that are meaningful today pays dividends way down the line and helps you build a successful career for not only you, but the people around you. So Brian, once again, thank you so much for coming on today, and we look forward to the growing partnership together.
Of course. Appreciate it, Andy. Thanks everyone for the time, and looking forward to further developing it.
Likewise.